Hello everybody, it's your non-binary pal Gracious E.V.A here, and today is another speed paint video, but it's going to be a little different. I've been wanting to give some more insight into how I do things in my style that can maybe also serve as some tips for anyone who might need it. Disclaimer, these aren't meant to be tutorial videos, just videos that go in more depth about how I go about specific things in my art process. I'm not a formally trained artist and my style is more unconventional, so if you're listening to this and find that none of what I say makes sense to you, that's okay because your style and art process is more than likely very different from mine. But if you do find some of what I say helpful for your own art, then that's great. Anyway, this video is going to be covering how I do line art. My line art style is very textured, crunchy, and borderline pixely, just how I like it. A big part of this comes from the brush I use. I use the Candela pen from the Clip Studio Paint Asset Store, but any other hard, crunchily textured brush will work in most programs for me. I also make sure that my pressure sensitivity is relatively high so that the size difference is more noticeable, and that the taper is good. Before I start on the line art, I like to make the sketch a different color so I can see my lines better. I typically do this with a function in Clip Studio Paint EX, where if you hit Ctrl B, it will change the color of the sketch to be all the same hue, and you can change the default color afterwards. However, alpha locking the sketch and changing the color works just as well. I will also go ahead and group my layers into one folder, which will consist of a main, face, hatching, and other. For the main layer, I will put almost the entirety of the character I'm drawing there. For the face, I put the face, which is obvious. Then of course my hatching will go in the hatching layer. And finally, the other layer will normally be reserved for anything that I need to line with a different color, but I don't use this layer all the time. I begin with the main layer starting around the face and continuing from there. If there's a specific part of the liner that I feel like will be easier to line if I overlapped it with other areas, then I will just create a new layer, draw what I need to, and erase the unwanted parts and merge it back with the main layer so that erasing it doesn't mess up the main layer too much. Although a lot of times I'll just do that all in one layer, which kind of leads me into a technique I use. This helps me to make my lines feel more organic rather than sterile, and that is to use the undo button as little as possible. For example, if I try to line one area and make a mistake, rather than hitting undo and starting the whole line over again, I will instead just erase the area of the line that I messed up and continue from there. It might not sound like much of a difference, but I find it definitely works to make my lines feel more organic and a little messier, which is what I'm going for with my line art. I also like to go with a medium-ish size for my brush, but definitely not too thin or too thick. After I'm done with the main layer, I move on to the face. The reason why I keep the face separate from the rest is so that I can adjust it easily and I can make it invisible when I fill in the base colors. I've been experimenting with how to make the eye line more interesting, the top part anyway, and I've landed on this. Instead of filling in the whole eye line, which usually makes it look really flat and thick, I hatch in the space, leaving in gaps that I can color with either the hair color or the eye color later. For the underline, I'll keep it just one line, but I like to carve it a little and add a tear duct at the end for a touch of realism. And for the mouth, I'll block in whatever is not the tongue or teeth on the inside. At this point, I'll also line anything I need to in my other layer, and then I'll finally move on to the hatching layer. I don't have a specific method for this, other than just making lines that follow the shape of whatever area I'm in, and making sure that there's plenty of it. Some consistencies that I will do are hatching the bridge of the nose with these little 3 marks, and sometimes the underneath it as well with a more circular shape. I'll also hatch at the ends of the eyelids, and I'll do a little bit of faint hatching towards the end of the hair and at the top where the part is, just to make the hair a little more textured as well. This especially works with characters with longer hair. Yes, this step does tend to kill my hand, by the way. Now, admittedly, I did get a little bit messier here than I would have liked, but I also like to treat this as my shading assist. If I know what my lighting source is, I'll create my hatched line as my starting place for the shadows. It doesn't always happen perfectly. Sometimes I'll incorrectly estimate how the light will interact with a specific area and have to go back and fix it, but it really does become helpful. I'll also go ahead and block in the irises while I'm here. And finally, for my last step, I usually do this in either my base coloring or towards the end of shading, but I'll color my line art by setting all the layers to alpha lock and using the fill all tool. I tend to use a darker color, but saturated, so it's obvious that it's not black. For fan art pieces like this, I usually just go with a color that fits the piece or design, but for my own characters it's a lot easier. Fun fact about my character designing process, I like to give every one of my characters a different color for their line art. Note this does not give me that much of a headache when drawing them in my comics, but it absolutely does when drawing character interaction drawings. And that's my entire line art process. Now let's move on to talking about the rest of my piece in a more lightly scripted chill speed paint style. So as you've probably been able to tell, this artwork is fan art of Frieren from Frieren Beyond Journey's End. The anime has been super popular as of late, but I've actually been reading the manga, and I absolutely love it. It's a story about an immortal elf who's basically follows her story after the main adventure story with her old party. It's so interesting, and it really goes over like the concept of being an immortal being around very unimmortal beings whose lives are so short compared to your own. I absolutely will always fall in love with a story that has anything to do with immortality. There's other manga that I'm also reading that has the same premise of immortality, and I even have a character that's in a similar vein. I don't know why, I've always found the concept of immortality interesting, whether it's like talking about species that are immortal or talking about how it really can be like a curse sometimes to live forever. That's why I would never want to be immortal, because I know what happens when you're immortal. Not good things happen when you're immortal, especially if you're not meant to be an immortal creature, just like my character. I've actually drawn Frieren in my sketchbook before, just to like get the gist of how she would look like in my style, and she translates very well, so I decided to go ahead and make an illustration of her. I based this scene off of the one where they're looking for the blue moonweed, aka Himmel's flowers, and I thought the scene in the anime looked really pretty, so I decided to base it mostly off of that, but change the composition a little bit. I sketched this mostly in IBS Paint X, but I decided to finish it on my computer because I believe I was sketching this while on a trip and then finished it up when I got home. I love the composition I chose. I admittedly always choose compositions that are more of an extreme perspective. In the actual anime, there is a bit of a perspective shot going on, but I like to do top-down perspectives more. Those are easier for me to draw, although I can do warm eye view a lot easier these days. If you don't know what that means, you watch some composition videos, or I can make a video about talking about my composition process as well. I decided to use a brush for the flowers, which might not have been the best idea, but I was lazy and I didn't want to draw all those flowers. That's too much. I went with one brush at the beginning, but I did change this later on because it really didn't look like the flowers at all. The brush I chose fortunately did look quite a bit like the flowers in the show, so that's good. What I also loved about the scene in the anime was that it was a sunset scene, and you know how I love those, so this was a great excuse for me to just use my warm tone colors as I please, because I love those. So yeah, rendering was fun, except for her hair. I've complained about this so many times. I hate rendering characters with white hair. You might not think this because I myself have several characters with white hair, but nope, I don't like it. I don't like it. Fortunately, I did come up with a method of this by painting in some colors, not just in her hair, but in other areas of her as well, because her whole design is pretty pale. So rendering all of her without putting down some darker colors was going to be pretty hard. So yeah, I stuck to like the colors, or like I went with like almost like a bounce light effect, where towards the top the colors were like the orangey colors of the sunset, but towards the bottom it was the blue colors of the flowers. And yeah, so rendering after that made things a lot easier. Rendering the eyes was really fun. I tried to do like a combination of my own eye style and then how she looks in the anime. And yeah, I also did some of my overpainting around the face, which I do with a multiply layer and an add glow layer, and that definitely made the face a little more realistic. And yeah, for the background, I only slightly shaded in like the castle walls. The sky, obviously, I did in my normal way, and I fixed the flowers towards the end. I also added some petals in the foreground and some sun rays. And that was pretty much it for this piece. I really like how it turned out, and I hope you do. And that's it for this video. Let me know if there are any other parts of my art process that you would like to hear more in depth about. And I hope you have enjoyed this video and this speed paint. If you have, be sure to check out my webcomics in the description below. My Etsy shop is also down there. This is the Kickstarter is still going. And I will talk to you in the next video. Bye!